And it could be something simple where he just feels he needs to go and just talk about people he talked with that week to kind of dump. I mean, my wife being in counseling, she says every counselor should have a counselor that they go to dump the junk they have to get dumped on so that they don't become part of this cyclical, falling into depression, falling into anxiety. I mean, I deal with anxiety and depression. I have bipolar tendencies. But I'm to the point now where I'll tell you about it. But 10 years ago, I'm not gonna let people know that I'm depressed. I remember I was having a conversation. I have a 16-year-old now. Andy is 16 years old. And I'm sure you've experienced it. When you have a boy, there's times where they know everything. And him and I are at the stage of life where we're like oil and water, and we have a lot more oil and water days than we do. And I was talking with our pastor about it, and I said, it's actually gotten better. We started being worship director. I said, Andy and I have actually connected really well doing this worship stuff because he does all the tech there. And I said, it's really neat. But he said to me, I said, I suffer from anxiety, I suffer from depression, and I have bipolar tendencies. And he said, I would never have known because you mask it well. And I think when he said that, I'm thinking to myself, maybe that's the problem, is that I have masked it too well. When people say, how you doing? I mean, I'm not unloading all of my laundry, but I'm doing good. I'm having a good day. But a good day to me might not be a great day to somebody else. And but there's that kind of part of me that's like, I don't want to tell people that I struggle with this because they might think differently of me. But I think in the reality, there are more people in our churches that suffer from the same things these leaders on those statistics suffer from, that I think somewhere along the line, we've got to be teaching within our Bible colleges that it is okay to be human within reason. It doesn't mean it's a stamp to continue to sin, but we need to be human and allow ourselves some vulnerability, because in that vulnerability, I mean, look at Jesus. He was vulnerable to his 12 disciples. In that vulnerability, there's an emotional connection that will connect, that I think may be needed to maybe reverse some of this uh, success is better, success is the way to go, and really go back to maybe those foundational pastoral shepherding components that you have been talking about.
Well, transparency, vulnerability, they build credibility and they build trust. Credibility and trust are key components that a pastor and a ministry leader needs to have. And they need to have that with the team and with the people that he or she is leading. And we see that again. You cited Jesus. He was tired, and he told them. Now they knew that he was the Son of God, and but yet he's tired. He was very transparent, very vulnerable with them. I look at the life of the Apostle Paul. Paul was very, very open, very transparent with his life. And so when I read about him, what I see is that there's a lot of merit to being very, very transparent and very vulnerable with some of the things that that you struggle with. He said, he had a thorn in the flesh, and of course God used that to keep him humble. But Paul was someone who said, "It's in my weakness God makes me strong," and he was very open with
Yeah.
his weaknesses. I think we've entered into that place in American culture where we feel more comfortable being transparent and being more vulnerable. But back to something you said regarding Shauna, I personally believe now that every pastor needs another pastor who has been there and done that. So he or she could call up this person at any time and say, "This is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm going through," and talk with them about that. So Jesus sent out, everybody in pairs. When I look at the Church of Antioch, Paul and Silas, they were sent out, together. They were sent out in pairs. There are strength when you have somebody that you can call and you can talk to. having a pastor who's been there and done that is different than having a counselor and a therapist. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have one to the exclusion of the other. You have a therapist, they're trained in dealing with some of the mental health issues that a pastor or a ministry leader is dealing with. But just to have another pastor and someone who's seasoned, who's again been there, done that, you can call them up and I said, "This is what I'm facing. This is what I'm experiencing," and for them to be able to talk with you. And I do this all the time. I'm on the phone with people, and let's say I'm on the phone an hour with them, and 50 minutes is just them talking. And my goal is just to listen. I had, I spoke with a pastor. It was early on this week. We were on the phone for about an hour and 10 minutes. He was talking about very intimate issues. Um, I probably spoke 10 minutes of the hour and 10 minutes, but he had the 60 minutes where he talked. At the end of the conversation, he said to me, "I just want to thank you for listening to me because you're the first person that I think has actually heard me." That's all we needed. Just needs to be heard by someone who's been there, who's done that, who says, "I'm going to walk through this with you."
It's interesting. Even I work in education. Like I said, I do a whole bunch of things, but one of the things that in communicating with students, we've had trainings on, and that is to, silence is good. Silence is good. You don't feel like you have to have an answer for everything somebody is sharing with you. And that's difficult for me because as soon as somebody says something, especially within, my wife or son, I'm like, I'm already there. I'm like a mile down the road, and they're like, "Can I finish what I'm saying?" But it seems like, that's what people need. They need to be able to have that spot where they can just come and talk and look, this is what's happening in my life, and have that other person on the other end just listening and, speaking as need be.
And again, you're not going to find that level of openness when a small group of pastors get together. That's not going to be the case. So again, I'm not going to open up about I've been battling an addiction with porn, or I'm over medicating myself, or I've started drinking to numb myself to some of the pain. That is not going to come out, within the context of a small group of people. That will, when you're talking one on one with someone that you build a relationship with, that you trust, and then they're going to take you to the next level and say, "Can I just tell you some of the things, some of my coping mechanisms?" And a lot of times, as I get into conversations with pastors and ministry leaders, at some point in time, I ask them the question, "Tell me, how are you coping with all of this?" And for the most part, if I've got a relationship with them that's been that has been cultivated over the course of time, they're going to say these are the things that are going on in my life.
And it can be scary to say it to just anybody else, depending on where you're at in that tier of ladder of ministry. There's a quote you put in here, and again, going back to that successful kind of defining success from Mother Teresa. And she said, I was never called to be successful. I was just called to be faithful. And in my striving to be faithful, my life will be fruitful. And because it's fruitful, you could say I am successful. I mean, when you think about it, when she died, she wasn't being buried in a golden casket. It was just a wooden box that they carried her with an open lid to put her in the ground. And when we get to the end of our lives, as leaders and in church leadership and as pastors or ministry leaders, that's what it's about.
Yeah,
It's not about, did I have a multi-million dollar ministry that sent materials all over the world and I was on television every week. It's, was I faithful? Because Christ tells us to be faithful in the small things, and He'll be faithful in the big. And it just, I mean, that's just amazing. Any other thoughts on that first myth? Kind of before we jump into the second one, bigger, better success are synonymous, and becoming a great leader is key to success. Any other thoughts you'd like to mention?
If we're faithful in the small, God will entrust more to us. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to move from one church that's smaller to a larger church. But again, that's the way. That's how we interpret it. Let me go back to this couple that that are in England. So both of them, they're pastoring two Iranian churches. They left Iran, when the Ayatollah came into power. They came to the UK as refugees, and eventually they ended up taking on these two churches, and they're serving the people well. Now, in light of the scripture that you said that if we're faithful in the small, God will give us more. Well, again, it doesn't necessarily have to be equated with, okay, I've got a small church, so that gives me the freedom and the leeway to look for something larger because I have been faithful here. That may not be the case, but in their case, what happened is God opened up a door for them where they have been doing weekly broadcasts in Farsi that are being broadcast, throughout the UK, throughout Europe, and throughout the Middle East, where they're reaching thousands upon thousands upon thousands of Farsi speakers. But they sit in the UK pastoring two small churches where 90% of the people have fled Iran, and they're not really sure what tomorrow is going to bring. That's faithfulness.
Yeah, that's totally taking what we have here in the United States and flipping it upside down.
And so it challenges me as a person. It's like, okay, so then what what drives you? Is it the need and the desire to be successful? If that's the case, then the way you can become successful is that you have a bigger church
Mhm.
or you have a ministry,
Mhm.
have written books, and you're on the circuit and your name is plastered everywhere. Is that the driving factor? Is that the primary motivation within the heart of the leader? Or is the primary motivation is that I'm going to be faithful with what it is that God has given me
Mhm.
to
Yeah.
not be the more that someone else has, but can I be content with what it is that he's entrusted me to do? And if this is all that he asked me to do on this side, of life, then am I content with that? Those are really, really penetrating questions that we have to ask ourselves. Looking back on it, I'm saying if I was to grade myself, it would be below a C because the driving motivation, because I was caught in this culture
Mhm.
uh, where we want to be successful. We just want to be successful. And the way we become successful is that we have a growth plan that is going to work just like a business plan. We have a growth plan that's going to work, and we're going to move from here to there to the next. But in the end, at the very end, the question that I have to ask myself, and every pastor has to ask himself or herself, am I being faithful to what it is that he's called me to do? And if the growth plan doesn't work, am I being faithful to make disciples of the people that God has entrusted to me? And am I reaching my community for Christ,
Yeah.
where we are building a kingdom-oriented community there that's going to bring transformational change to the lives of people within the community?